Just kind of a guide that will guide you each week along with our Advent themes. We're preaching along the lines of these as well. And so thank you, Kendall, and others. Take one of those and use it. Anyone use it? I know everyone's hands are up, so you're like, no, I didn't use it. Did anybody actually use it this week? And hopefully in your own, time, and found that a valuable resource. Well, last week we lit the first candle, the hope candle, and after service. Speaking of the hope candle, after service, I was looking at my daughter. I don't know if some of you can see this behind you. And this is our hope candle. I was looking at her after service, meditating on the hope candle, and I was like, oh my goodness, we have birthed the hope candle in our own home. So if you don't know, our youngest daughter's name is Hope, and as I was looking at her, I'm like, if I lit that little wick on it, that would be she is the perfect little hope candle. Anyhow, I digress. Back to what we're talking about. Advent. Advent is a season of waiting. These candles on this table are a symbol of that. Last week we talked about this idea that in Advent we wait. Advent is also a season of anticipation, and it's a season where we anticipate the advent or the coming of the Messiah, of the Son, of Jesus. And in a lot of ways, you and I, in human history, we are sitting now in between the advents, if you know what I mean. We sit in this kind of in-between time where Jesus has come. There is the first advent. He has already come. His kingdom has already been established. And yet we still await the second advent, right? We still await the second coming of Messiah. And so you and I, even today, as we think about waiting, as some of us are waiting for things that perhaps might only be healed at that second advent, answers to questions that will only be given perhaps when he comes again. But we sit in the midst and we wait. Gail Boss, in her book, All Creation Waits, says the following. She writes, Advent to the church fathers was the right naming of the season when light and life are fading. They urged the faithful to set aside 4 weeks to fast, give, and pray, always to strip down, to let the bared soul recall what it knows beneath its fear of the dark, to know what Jesus called the one necessary thing, that there is one who is the source of all life, one who comes to be with us and in us, even especially in darkness and death, one who brings a new beginning. Gail Boss bringing a strong Advent word to us this second Sunday of Advent. Have you noticed, as you've walked perhaps your own neighborhood, have you noticed the leaves on the trees starting to thin? This happens in most of our country around October, but here in Southern California, perhaps you've noticed color changes. You've noticed even the trees around your home or your apartment or wherever you live or the streets at which you walk. Have you noticed the trees starting to thin? Have you noticed it's getting darker by the day? That every day we have less and less light. In 13 days, we will go through this yearly phenomena we call winter solstice, right? December 21st. And on winter solstice, we will have the most amount of what? Darkness in our year. Back on June 21st, we had summer solstice, and I looked this up. On June 21st, there was 14 hours, 25 minutes, and 32 seconds of daylight. 14 hours, 25 minutes, and 32 seconds of daylight. In 13 days, on winter solstice, we will have 9 hours, 53 minutes, and 5 seconds of daylight. Some of you are trying to do the math now, aren't you? Done it for you. That means in 13 days, we will have 4 hours, 32 minutes, and 27 seconds shorter daylight than we had 6 months ago. And is it any coincidence then that here, right as we're anticipating and waiting for the light, the birth of the Messiah, the celebrating the birth, is it any coincidence that right before Christmas we enter our darkest days, when life is fading and leaves are falling and there's less light than there's ever been, and then there's Christmas. so we set aside these weeks, as Gail Boss writes, to focus on the one who comes to be with us and in us, even especially in darkness and death. One who brings a new beginning. I mean, throw that on your Christmas letter this year. Throw that idea right after the section about how your 7-year-old took a close second in the Nobel Peace Prize for the 3rd consecutive year. And then go on and write, so as I sit here letting my bared soul recall what it knows beneath its fear of the dark, Merry Christmas from our family to yours. Happy holidays. I mean, this is good stuff. Advent, Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote, Advent creates people, new people. It's about being born again. And I don't know about you and your experience if you've been walking with Jesus and people have said, have you been born again? My answer now is which time? Because my experience has been, I have been born again and again and again and again and again. Anybody share that experience? I've been born again so many times. Jesus has met me and created something new in me, new life, in the midst of perhaps where there was darkness and death. And with that in mind, we now want to turn to our second candle. Our second Advent candle this week invites us to say yes to how the Holy Spirit's invitation and how the Holy Spirit might want to give our bared souls peace in the midst of whatever circumstance you may have entered this room and this circle with today. And so let's see if the Holy Spirit doesn't want to, in the next few minutes, create some new kinds of people. For some of us in the room, in the next few minutes, you may be born again. There may be something new, and the invitation that is given to you and I is to simply say yes to whatever that is, whatever and wherever the Spirit wants to give peace. So last week we looked at Simeon. We looked at Simeon's patient hope, the hope candle, as he waited for the consolation of Israel, as he waited for the nation to be comforted. And yet to fully understand, I think, what Simeon was waiting for, we have to understand that text and what we were looking at last week. We have to understand the socio-political situation that he and the other first-century Jews were facing, living in an oppressed, occupied Palestine. We know that, and I mentioned this last week, that Simeon and fellow Jews had been living under Roman occupation for decades. And we know that the occupation before that there'd been this long history of occupation, correct? That before the Romans, it was you had other empires, Macedonians, the Greco-Roman, the Macedonian Empire, you had the Persians, you had Babylon, you had Assyria. We can go back and back and back. And so we know that they'd been living for decades under Roman oppression. Literally, they had Roman boots on their collective throats for decades. And we have to understand that when we approach the Christmas story and when we read about Simeon's waiting, patient waiting for God to come and God to comfort his people, for God to send Messiah. At this time in history, we know that the Roman Empire was vast. One of their authors wrote, the boundaries of Rome were the boundaries of the earth. In other words, Rome owned what? The known planet. Everything that was known at that time, Rome figured it either owned, occupied, or would soon occupy. They say the boundaries of Rome went somewhere from around India in the southeast all the way up to Britain in the north, down to northern Africa. Basically, as far as we had been and explored, Rome had claimed that as their own. And they conquered lands, and they did this by using fear, intimidation, and coercive violence. I mean, that's how they basically pushed forward their agenda. The Roman armies would essentially, picture it like this, you're at home in your village, one day Roman armies are seen off in the distance, eventually they get to your village, and they basically show up and say, we are now taking this land and claiming this land for the Roman Empire. We are asking everybody in it all now to pledge your loyalty and your allegiance to our Caesar. They even had a propaganda slogan that went like this, Caesar is Lord. So you pledge your allegiance, you pledge your loyalty to Caesar, and we have no issues. We have no problems, but we're simply going to be taking your land from you. And you say, well, what if we resist? What if we, and is it any Is it any coincidence then that among the first followers of Jesus, there arises another slogan? That those who follow Jesus begin to say something very much, much different. The early Christians, one of their slogans is what? Jesus is Lord. And so the question becomes then, well, who's your Lord? Anyway, we digress. What if you resisted the empire? What if you, in fact, pledged your allegiance and your loyalty to a different Lord? Well, then I guess they'd show you what was behind door number 2, and it looked a lot like what's sitting in front of us here. Behind door number 2 was a tool of the empire, an execution tool of the empire, a tool of the empire that basically guaranteed your submission. We can actually read Jewish historians, villages that resisted, like Sepphoris, and we read about the fact that because of their resistance, the Romans just went ahead and burned the entire village. By the way, this all happened in 4 BC, around the time of Jesus' birth, just a few miles from Bethlehem. A group of Jews, a Jewish village that decided we're going to resist, burned the village and crucified 2,000 of its inhabitants in one day on Roman crosses. So you see, the Roman Empire, it moved itself forward, and maybe you remember from 10th grade history, you remember reading about Pax Romana, which is Latin for what? Roman peace. See, the Roman Empire, from which this story comes out of, that we're reading, the Christmas story, the Roman Empire kept the peace, but it was peace that it was achieved through use of coercive violence, fear, and intimidation. And so the Roman Empire boasted about the fact that they could take many, many different lands and countries and nationalities and cultures and people groups, and they could all get them all to live, what? At peace with one another. But how did they accomplish that? How did they do it? It was peace through the sword. It was peace that was derived with violence. And is it really peace if it comes through the sword? Is it any peace? If it is derived by coercive violence and military might and constant threats of horrific death, oh yes, there was peace. There was Pax Romana. There was a long season of peace, but it was peace through the sword. And can we all agree that peace, any peace that is derived by violence, manipulation, and secured by death or intimidation, that is no peace? At least in the way the biblical authors talk about it. When the Bible talks about peace, you really get 2 words. In the Hebrew scriptures, you get that familiar word shalom, right? Peace, shalom. And in the New Testament, it's the word eirene, peace. And this kind of peace, it's not just the absence of conflict. It's something we even sang about this morning. It's wholeness. It's the sense of healing and wholeness. It's togetherness. It's rightness. As one author put it, this kind of peace is the way things should be. And I think at some level, we all get that, don't we? We have those moments where we're like, yes, this is the way it should be. This is how God has ordered the world. This feels right. This is just. This is peace. This is a peace that's derived from healed relationships. This is a peace that is secured by love, that is secured by a pursuit of wholeness together in a community. And I don't know about you, but for me, the Christmas story takes on so much more meaning and so much more significance when we place it smack dab in the middle of Pax Romana, and we let it speak from there about a very different kind of peace. Even the one that we're going to read about in a moment, and that was read already at this table, about this Prince of Peace. That it's a story in which last week we talked about an elderly man, where we have this righteous, devout man in the temple who's waiting patiently and waiting expectantly and looking forward to Messiah and God's consolation, who gives praise for the hope that he holds in his hand. And then right after giving praise, looks at the baby's mom and talks about the ever-present reality of the Roman sword. It's this kind of peace that we pick up in the middle of that kind of story. But here's the unexpected, and here is the subversive, and here is the redemptive work of God in the midst of that story, because we read that Jesus comes then as the fulfillment of what the prophets wrote about over 700 years prior. He comes to bring a very different kind of peace, not a peace with violence in its wings, but a peace with healing in its wings. Let's go back to what was read already in Isaiah chapter, I said the prophets speak of this. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2 through 7 says this: "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They have rejoiced before you, as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle, and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. He'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne, and over his kingdom will establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this." I mean, the prophet's words, they take on such significance, don't they, in this context that we've been looking at, such deeper meaning as we read about Jesus' fulfillment, the ultimate fulfillment that we find even in the prophet's words through Jesus. I mean, look, if we go back, look at some of the language. On those living in a land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. One who comes to be with us and in us, even and especially in darkness and in death. So says Gail Boss and the prophet Isaiah. Talks about those burdened. The prophet writes about the yoke that burdens them, talks about a bar across their shoulders, talks about the rod of the oppressor on their backs, talks about every warrior's boot that had been on their collective throats, every warrior's boot that was used in battle, every garment that had been rolled in blood will be destined for what? They'll be burned. Fuel for the fire. So we're throwing the warrior's boots in the fire, and every garment rolled in blood. It's just going to become fodder for the fire. Why? Because a child is born. And more specifically, a son will be given. And oh, by the way, the government will be on his shoulders. And there will be no end to his kingdom. This child, he's going to set up a kingdom. We could even call it an everlasting kind of kingdom. And that this kingdom is somehow going to transcend and supersede all earthly kingdoms. And then it's like, well, what will they call him? This child, this son. And the prophet gives us a lot of names: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, but the one we're focusing on this morning, he says, oh, he'll be called the Prince of Peace. Literally, the Prince of Shalom. The ruler who brings shalom, peace, he says. The one who sets things the way they should be. The bringer of new beginnings. That one. Perhaps we could call this kind of peace that he will bring Pax Christi, which would be Latin for the peace of Christ. And of the greatness of his government, he says, in his peace there will be no end. And his kingdom will be established. and his kingdom will be upheld, not through the sword, not using coercive violence and manipulation and fear and intimidation. It will not be established that way. This kingdom will come through what? Righteousness and justice. And as Simeon predicted a month after he was born, that kingdom would be firmly established and would come in full, not by picking up a sword and subjecting others to it, but allowing himself to be subjected to it. Subjecting himself to the sword, dying on the tool that the empire used to keep the peace and turning it on its head. Dying on the tool that the empire used to keep the peace, and then making a public spectacle of that tool by triumphing over it through his love and resurrection. Now that, my friends, is real power. Real power is not the power to take life. Real power is the power to create it out of nothing. That's real power. Real power is not how much can I get, how much can I take, how much can we take from others. It's look at the extent of how much my love can give. That's real power. And that is real peace. Peace that I can offer you this morning. And here's the thing, and I want to close with these thoughts, and so follow me here. This is not, what I am talking about is not some mythical peace achieved by using manipulation or coercive violence or fear of getting it wrong, whatever it might be. It's not some mythical peace of trying to get others to behave or fall in line or just to show up for the Christmas photo with the sweater that you wanted them to wear and manipulating them to get there. It's not peace, some kind of mythical Christmas peace that we're talking about that way, because real peace restores what is broken. And real peace heals what is sick, and real peace redeems what has been lost, and real peace gives voice to the voiceless, and it brings together what is fragmented and broken, and it does this again and again and again and again. It creates something new, brand new. And I hope that's good news for you this morning. I hope it is, because you see the beauty and the wonder. This is the beauty and the wonder of the Christmas story for me. The beauty and the wonder of the Christmas story is that it takes place in the midst of the darkness. It comes and it shines a light right when it couldn't get any darker. The leaves are falling, we're losing daylight by the day. And when it couldn't get any darker in our world, and it couldn't get any darker and more divided in our culture. You're like, could it get any worse? I don't know. But the good news is, in the midst, the Christmas story takes place right in the middle of that. And it offers an alternative kind of peace. It takes on the darkness. It takes on death as the ever-present reality that it always has been and always will be. And it's actually God's answer. It's actually the answer to the ever-present reality of darkness and death in our world. Because if we let it, I think what can so often happen in our culture is the Christmas season becomes an escape from reality, doesn't it? It offers us a few weeks of escape to some mythical, magical world of happiness and things that are all wonderful. Light displays and eggnog and everyone's happy and singing and candles and cookies and fireplaces, and it kind of offers us an escape, doesn't it? It can, at least. And all of those things are wonderful, but they're not an escape. But that can happen. It can become a beautiful dream. And when it does, the temptation is to ignore reality. And yet, if we place the Christmas story firmly in its context, and we just let it speak from there, if we place it within the darkness, like I said, it isn't then an escape, but it's simply God's answer. It's God's answer in the midst of the darkness. From within all that we see that is hurting and broken. The Christmas story then becomes God lighting a candle. it becomes God's, he lights, and you don't light a candle in a room that's full of sunlight, do you? You light a candle when it's dark and you can't see. And that's what the Christmas story is. It's God lighting a candle. It's the story of the one who comes to be with us and in us, even especially in darkness and in death. The peace that the Prince of Peace wants to bring every one of us this holiday season is a different kind of peace. It's an inexplicable, as we've even talked about it this morning, peace that is birthed in the midst of the darkness, in the midst of death, in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of not knowing where it's going to come from and how it's going to be provided for. That's where this peace takes effect. It's not an escape. It's right there with you. It's a peace like a candle that brings to light whatever might be, whatever darkness there might be, whatever's stressing you, whatever's troubling you, whatever's keeping you up at night. It's that kind of peace there. It's a peace that wants to create something new today and tomorrow, again and again and again and again. If you read the booklet this week, now that most of you, I think all of you have one, I hope you do. If you read the booklet on page 7, it's an invitation to peace. And the second spiritual practice, you'll be reading about Joseph, and you'll be reading about the inexplicable peace that was given to Joseph in the midst of a lot of darkness. Because if you read the Christmas story through these eyes, you begin to read Joseph's story. It's a fairly dark one, isn't it? A fair amount of confusion, would you agree? A fair amount of just placing his trust and his hope and his faith in something he's like, I don't know if this is going to work out or not. But you'll read that, and you'll meditate on that and this peace that is offered to him. And I wonder if there might be anyone in the circle this morning, anyone that came here this morning, and you are simply in need of that peace today. You're in need of a candle to be lit right in the midst of your darkness, right in the midst of the confusion and the chaos and the I have no idea how we're going to make this work, and I don't know if I'm going to finish all 4 papers by Wednesday. I have no idea. And then study, and finish, saying goodbye to friends and working all these things out and doing all this kind of stuff, and I got to find a new roommate for next semester, and I'm just confused, and I'm feeling like stressed out, and might there be someone on the first day of that week who needs peace? Kind of inexplicable peace, like we even sang, that passes, as Paul would write, understanding. But here's the catch. God is offering that kind of peace this morning. It's an invitation. But you and I, when you're given an invitation, we must do what? You got to say yes to it. It necessitates a response. Because isn't it true, some seasons of life, it's easier to sit in the darkness. Anyone ever been there? You're like, because this would mean that I change. I would have to make some more healthy decisions if I was to receive that. Because sometimes receiving peace means it's going to take some work on our part, right? And sometimes it's easier just to be dysfunctional. Let's just be honest. It's easier. We know our own junk, and we know where it takes us, and we're like, I can manage it. It's manageable junk. But maybe God wants to do something new in you. Create new people, like Bonhoeffer said. Again and again and again. The way that the prophet ends this is, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in a land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. In 2 weeks from today, winter solstice will be over. 2 weeks from today, it's going to start getting what? It's going to be getting lighter. And every day for the next 6 months, it's going to get lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter each day as we walk. You can't stop it. And I wonder maybe if that's a metaphor for some of us in the room. Maybe for you, you're like, but it's still going to be dark on December 22nd, really early, isn't it? Yeah, but it's going to be a little bit lighter than the 21st. And on the 27th of December, it's going to be a little bit lighter. And on January 4th, it's going to be even lighter. And March 7th, even lighter. All the way until summer. So it's just good. And maybe for some of you, that's it. That's it today. You're like, I need peace. I want to say yes to this kind of peace and just trust as I walk in faith day by day, it's going to get a little bit lighter. A light has dawned. It's just dawning. It's going to get brighter and brighter as we go. But can we take that journey together? Rainier, why don't you? I don't even know where Rainier sits now. This whole circle thing throws me off. I'm used to looking there. He's not there. Where are you? There you are, behind the tree. Rainier's going to come up and close us in some worship. But in your, there's little cards in these. I think they look like something like this. If I have one, I'll put it on the screen. Little cards in those buckets. Maybe you need to take a moment. And on those cards, they simply say it's an invitation to peace. And spend a moment. Can we just try to identify in what circumstances are you needing to say yes to the Spirit's invitation to receive peace this Advent season? Can you name some circumstances? Maybe you've got 7 circumstances that spring to mind fairly quickly. Maybe there's just one. And her name is, his name is, you're like, I got one relationship that, my goodness, Christmas morning is going to be interesting. Or when we go over to there, there could be fire. I need some peace here. But let's just take a minute as the band just begins to play. And let's identify some stuff. And let's just ask the Spirit. I'm just going to stay quiet. I'm going to invite the Spirit's ministry now. Try to get out of the way. And we'll see what the Spirit wants to do. So Holy Spirit, we quiet our souls. We quiet our minds. So many of us have so many things to get to today, and we need your peace. And we want to receive the kind of peace that you promise us that comes to us in the midst of the craziness, in the midst of whatever darkness there might be and confusion. We want to receive it there. And so, Spirit, would you speak to us now? Show us where we need your peace and then flood us with it. We wait upon you.